Desert pavement, not to be confused with desert pavement. Desert pavement is the accumulation of cobble-sized particles at the floor of an arid region. It's pavement within a desert, easy enough to remember. Functionally, this acts as a guard against wind erosion. You'll recall that in dry areas, arid regions such as deserts, wind is a much larger erosional force than it is anywhere else in the world, because you don't get much influence from streams, rivers, rain, that sort of stuff. So these larger cobbles, they can't be carried away by the wind, so they act as a good guard for the tiny little sand and silt particles underneath them. Otherwise, they would just be swept away very quickly. Now, the question of why desert pavement exists at all has been interesting for geologists to tackle. For a while, it was explained through the idea that through the natural processes over geologic time, the makeup of the original desert floor was very poorly sorted, just a mix of sand, silt, pebbles, cobbles, all the way up. And over time, the wind erosion in this arid region carried away the topmost sand and silt particles. It swept them away, and as it continued to do this, it would get rid of more and more of the ground, lowering the cobbles and pebbles that were at the top that couldn't be swept away, and lowering them down to others of similar size, resulting in a larger concentration of these larger particles. Now, the big flaw in this explanation was that you really don't see a good mix or a poorly sorted mix of these sand and silt. The layer beneath the desert pavement, which is usually just a couple pebbles or cobbles thick, is a really large layer of sand or silt. Very few cobbles are mixed in. So according to this traditional theory, there's no real explanation for that. They just kind of went along with it. That's what you do in science, in case you didn't know. If you've got something and it's almost good, but nobody can really find a better way to explain it, then you just kind of roll with it until something better comes along. So more recently, that something better did come along, and it was the explanation that areas where we observe desert pavement, which of course isn't all of the desert, areas where we observe desert pavement began as wetter regions where streams or rivers were able to carry pebbles or cobbles, particles of that size, and had eroded them and then deposited them at some spot, which would then become the desert pavement once it dried out. And over time, this newly arid region begins to fill up as wind carries in sand and silt-sized particles. It begins to fill up, and these sand and silt particles that are carried in percolate down. They filter through these larger rocks to reach the bottom, the bedrock. And over time, wind continues to carry these particles in, and eventually you've got a really large, thick layer of these finer sand and silt particles overlain by the desert pavement. And that's how it works.